Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff, along with William Swig and Sonny Lohman. William, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. So today we're going to be talking about the very much talked about Douglas Murray appearance on Joe Rogan with Dave Smith and all the implications. Sonny, thanks for joining us again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yes, so we're going to be talking about this Douglas Murray versus Dave Smith viral debate. At first, we wanted to do an episode on freedom of speech, and I didn't quite see how we could fit this viral debate into our speech episode. But then I realized it is kind of about freedom of speech, because one thing that Murray was trying to do was compel some sort of expert appearances on Rogan's podcast. And so, in a sense, one thing that Sonny said in our prior discussions was that if you don't respect free speech culturally, it's not going to be legal for very long politically. So that kind of resonated with me. And I realized that one thing Murray was doing was he wasn't respecting free speech, especially Rogan's free speech, his decisions, to have the experts he wants on or the people he wants to talk to and discuss the topics he wants to talk about. Murray was trying to lead him into some sort of different standard for who to have on the program. And I think that standard implicitly is the public interest or Rogan's audience. So Murray's trying to impose this selfless or altruistic standard on Rogan for who he should have on the show. And Rogan, to his credit, stood his ground and said, no, that's not how I think about things. I bring on guests that I think would be interesting to talk to. So Rogan is pursuing his own values, his own self-interest. And I think that's the proper standard for guiding, your discussions and who you have on your podcast. So we want to approach this issue of freedom of speech from that angle. And we have a few clips from the Rogan episode. So we'll begin with the clips and then elaborate our points after the clips.
And, one of my points is that a lot of it ended up being personal, that Murray wanted to go on with Rogan. Rogan told him Dave Smith would be there, and Murray didn't like that and just decided to, go in guns blazing. This is a minute 18 into it, right after the introductions. And Murray asks if Rogan has had enough people on who support Israel and Ukraine.
And I respect both of you. I think both of you are brilliant. And I bet you agree on a lot of things, and I bet you disagree on a lot of things. And it'd be fascinating to see your perspectives on these things. So that's why you're here together.
Okay.
And
well,
Douglas,
can I ask you something?
Yes, sir.
Since the war in Israel began, and since the war in Ukraine began, you've had quite a lot of people who are very against both in different ways.
Yes.
Do you think you've had enough people on who are supportive of either war?
I don't know that word enough, if that's a good word.
Let's say enough people who are on the side of Israel instead of wild critics of Israel.
Well, I've had a few. I mean, I believe God Sad is on the side of Israel.
For sure.
Jordan is on the side of Israel.
You had Mike Baker, Coleman Hughes.
Yeah.
Coleman did it for like 20 minutes. So it wasn't why he was here.
No. I mean, none of them. And none of them is why they're here. It's a good question.
One thing I can say for Rogan is that he has a good instinct on how to respond to people like Murray. He automatically focuses on the word enough. And he says, that's not how I think about things. I just want to have people on that I think are interesting. But here Murray is trying to make Rogan agree with this standard of having other people on, like people who support the war on. And, that's supposed to be a balanced attack or a balanced way of looking at things. But in my opinion, that's like trying to impose the fairness doctrine on the podcast world, especially Rogan's podcast. If you recall, the fairness doctrine was an FCC policy for broadcasters And it said that if you took an opinion on a controversial issue, you had to allow free time for the opposition to come onto your program and give the counter narrative. And so here Murray is saying, you haven't had enough pro-Israel people on. To be fair, you need to have those experts on. And so
he's micromanaging him. He's like, oh, this pro-Israel guy you only had on for 20 minutes. I mean, why don't you just write out the whole content of the show?
Right.
Yeah,
20 minutes isn't enough. Or, and imagine Joe Rogan having to have people on just to talk. Like, he's like, well, I don't have people on just to talk about this or that. Like, that is not Joe Rogan's show at all, ever. And Murray is saying, no, we need to change that. You need to actually make it a point that you're going to have on a person with this opinion that you know in advance this is their opinion. And so you have them on for the entire length of the show, not just 20 minutes. And like, I was wondering when I heard that, what's the date and time where you get to declare it fair? Like, is it Tuesdays at 3? Like, who gets to decide where that line is if now he has one other guy on or say he has a comedian on and that guy talks for 10 minutes on one side, does he then have to, oh gosh, now I got to rearrange my whole schedule for the next 2 months so that I make sure that I have somebody on, this week to do 10 minutes on the other side. Like, it's just,
I just can't imagine the gall of someone going on like the Johnny Carson show and, the guests and like immediately start criticizing Johnny for who he's having on his show. It's
also rude.
Exactly.
But it's impossible standard.
It's a little ironic because here Rogan has brought on Murray to give the pro-Israel side, yet Murray immediately launches an attack on Rogan for who he has on the show, the guests. So he's not recognizing that he's being brought on as the expert. He should just give his side, present facts and evidence for his side, and avoid these fallacious attacks that he's going to launch into against Smith and Rogan.
That's a good point. It's like, well, you've had me on to be the expert on Israel, and I'm going to complain that you don't have enough Israel experts on.
He's pissed that Dave was there too, that he didn't get the spotlight to himself. I mean, Rogan said at the end he thinks it's a good question. I doubt he really believes that. But in this next clip, Murray continues.
That could be a sign, though, Scott, that Murray is sort of, you've seen that movie Inception, where they try to get someone to believe they came up with an idea. They implant this idea in someone's mind during sleep, and then that guy wakes up and thinks he came up with that idea. So this might be a sign that Murray is having some effect on Rogan. Rogan saying, "Oh yeah, maybe I should be thinking about, balancing out my guest list." But I think he's strong. He's strong-willed enough that he's going to ultimately reject that standard, and he's going to go back to his own values.
Yeah, probably. Well, in this next clip, Murray continues questioning Rogan's selection of guests.
I think you've tilted one way.
Me personally?
No, just with the guests you've had.
The guests, yeah, probably more tilted towards the idea that perhaps the way they've done it is barbaric.
Mm-hmm. But why do you think that is? Just out of interest, I'm just interested in your selection of guests because you're like the world's number one podcast.
Yeah, it's not.
Just interested.
I don't.
Asking questions.
I don't think about it that way. I just think I'd like to talk to this person.
But.
Exactly.
I'm just interested. You're the number one podcast. How do you make these decisions? I'm just so curious.
The implication is that because you're number one, you have this extra responsibility. And, what got him there originally was his authenticity, that he's just like whoever he felt like interviewing. And I think people responded to the authenticity, and he got in early into the podcast craze, and it struck a chord. And for these people now to be saying, oh, this is how you need to do your show, it's like, why are you messing with the formula that got me here?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, Sonny says, like mocking Murray, like, I'm just curious how you come up with your guests. It's like, how do you think he comes up with his guests? It's like you say, Scott, he's curious about certain things and he wants to pursue his own interests and he wants to be authentic to his own values. That's how a normal person chooses who to talk to, you know, and Murray's out here acting like he doesn't understand, you know, conversation 101. He doesn't understand why Rogan is talking to his friends or talking to people who have podcasts that he listens to or talking to people he thinks are interesting. And he wants to impose this other standard, this altruistic standard on him. You know, no, you should be listening to other people who tell you who to bring on. You know, you should listen to people like me and like listen to the guests that I tell you to have on, because that's the way it should go. You shouldn't pursue your own interests or your own values. You should pursue these other people's interests.
Yeah, and who gets to decide for Joe?
Right.
And it's very woke in the sense that, you know, this idea that you can't talk to people you might disagree with. You can't talk to people. Like, I mean, Joe has on people all the time with views that suck or weird views, like UFO stuff. Or I was thinking when we were preparing for the show, he had on that government shill, Peter Hortez or whatever his name is, to talk about the vaccines and during the COVID thing. Totally opposed to Joe Rogan's position on all of that. He gives a platform to this government guy to come and explain why this is a public health issue. And, you know, Joe's like, whatever, come on, say what you have to say. The fact that the guy embarrassed himself, you know, because like it turns out that was all wrong. Also, he had on that CNN guy who insulted him so badly, that doctor. And he's still platforming anchors from CNN, even after all the things that they did to him.
And
so
they tried to cancel him after that appearance.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like
but
Joe's
you know, and then
show.
for the left to do that, that's part of what pushed Rogan over to the right, at least for the 2024 election. And now people like Murray seem intent on saying, no, you're not a real one of us. Get out of here. Go back to the left or something.
It is what makes Joe's show popular, is that it is this sort of, it is the culture. It's like he talks to everybody. And that is why his show is popular. He has become popular because nobody else was doing that. Everybody else was putting the restrictions, the censorship on the voices of America. And Joe didn't do that. And he had on everybody from government shills to UFO crazy people, you know?
When this next clip, Murray accuses Smith of throwing shit out there.
You throw a lot of shit out there. There's some point at which I'm just raising questions is not a valid thing. Mm-hmm. You're not raising questions. You're not asking questions. You're telling people something.
Do you think Daryl's doing that?
I think there's a whole bunch of guys doing that. I think Dave is doing that, very obviously. Dave's a comedian, but he's now mainly talking about Israel.
No, I don't know if I'm mainly talking about Israel.
That's all I see you on the internet doing.
Yeah, but that's you.
Well, that might be what you've seen.
It's just
I don't
you
think that's
consuming clips.
But that is also your shtick now, isn't it?
Well, what do you mean by that's my shtick?
Well, you're not a geopolitics guy in general, are you?
I don't even know exactly what you're asking.
I'm saying you've decided, being a comedian, you've decided now to become somebody who talks about Israel.
I think you're incorrect.
He's so condescending. It's unreal. And he doubles down on that, even though he's told specifically by both of them, that's not who Dave is. Dave is not some grifter who's just pivoted. I don't know if your audience knows who Dave Smith is, but he's the guy who was one of the 4 leaders of the Mises Caucus that overtook the Libertarian Party. He's extremely involved in politics. He's a comedian. He still does stand up. He's not like just doing this. But because he's very opinionated on this issue, he's been asked to talk about it a lot. And the fact that he's Jewish has made him a more credible voice for that side. And he is not on the side of Hamas. You know, he's just saying he's sort of an anti-war libertarian type. And that's his opinion.
I'm on Murray's side when it comes to Israel, and even that, people throw out there, I'm just saying, but I just don't think, he's basically saying, oh, because Dave Smith was a comedian, he now can't talk about Israel, or he's talking about Israel too much, or he's really just saying, you have no right to talk about the subject without fully saying it.
He's kind of accusing him of grifting off of it. Oh, it's your shtick now.
Well, he is trying to portray Dave Smith as this fake expert, which Dave Smith says, I've never claimed to be an expert. There are people in this world who teach themselves about subjects, autodidacts, who don't go to school to become an expert, or don't write books necessarily to become an expert, but they learn everything. They teach themselves. They go to libraries and study everything. And so they become knowledgeable. And sometimes they're more knowledgeable than the experts, who end up being corrupted by these establishment or corporations or other influences. And so it's important to have these sorts of people like Dave Smith, who we can trust at a different level, because we know they're not interested in the money or the power. They just want to, learn things and have the knowledge so they can have an informed opinion. And Murray is trying to shift tactics here. Originally his whole fairness or balance thing with Rogan wasn't really working. And so now he's launched into personal attack mode. So he's basically just telling Rogan, you have bad guests, you don't know how to select your guests, and Dave Smith, you're a shit thrower.
Yeah, he's insulting the other guests. That would be like, Johnny's guests turning to the other guests and starting to tell them they're no good.
Imagine if I came on here and started telling you guys, I don't like who you had on last week. What the hell?
In this,
I will give you a list for future reference.
Exactly. If you can have
Who would you like for us to have on?
In this next clip, to Smith's credit, he asks why Murray's appealing to authority.
But I don't quite get, what's all the appeal to authority stuff? I mean, you have to be an expert? Or,
no, I think authority matters. I think
expert?
Authority matters. And I think that if you just throw a lot of shit out there and then say, I'm not interested in the alternative views on this, and particularly when it's a counter-narrative that is wildly off. And when you get people, look, I just feel, we should get it out straight away, I feel you've opened the door to quite a lot of people who've now got a big platform, who have been throwing out counter-historical stuff of a very dangerous kind.
You mean Daryl? Are you talking about Daryl?
Daryl, who's the other one?
I don't think Daryl has.
Derek.
I don't think there's anything dangerous
what's
about
the other
what
guy? Derek. What's his name?
I love that Joe just comes out and names him. You're not going to hide a lot of people, a lot of platforms, everything vague. Douglas Murray is not speaking directly.
If I didn't know better, I'd think that Murray was the one on drugs, because he doesn't seem to know the names of anybody. He doesn't have clear points, and he's just engaging in fallacies. It's like he's not a clear, rational thinker anymore. He's got some sort of Rogan derangement syndrome here.
Well, if he was that angry, he should have not gone on the show. But he decided to go on there and attack. And the person he most thinks Rogan shouldn't have on the show is Dave Smith, especially during his own appearance.
And he says,
it's personal at the end of the day.
Well, he looks directly at Rogan and he's like, you have opened the door to dangerous people and ideas. And that, to me, is the anti-free speech cultural thing going on for him. Because it's not just Dave Smith. This is you are having people on your podcast who now have a bigger platform because of you, and who are pushing dangerous ideas into the culture. And we can't have that. You need to stop.
Dangerous ideas are everywhere. You're not going to just stop it with that. And, I disagree with Daryl Cooper, but,
Are you sure?
Has a right to be heard.
Have you listened to Daryl Cooper?
I've listened to some of him. The stuff about, we've gotten into it off air, but, I disagree with some of his stuff about minimizing the Holocaust, even if the number wasn't exactly 6 million. I do think
I guess I haven't heard him do that. Okay. I haven't listened to that whole, I have not listened to his series on Israel and Palestine. I heard the first episode, which
I'm
is
also
like
a huge Churchill fan.
Well, I did hear him say some stuff about Churchill, but I actually have heard all that before from Pat Buchanan and from people in Britain.
Yeah, that's my thing. I don't agree with it, and I think it should be out there.
It's not really fringe. It's not, I mean, I guess it's a fringe view, but it's not like so out of left field. There are a lot of people, including British people, who believe that Churchill made big mistakes and that he caused the scale of World War II. And I mean, we could get into our own president at the time, Roosevelt, and the stuff he did at that time that also contributed to how awful that war was and the end of that war and what happened with Stalin and stuff. So I'm sorry, but Hitler is not the only villain of World War II.
I think the point here is that Murray is saying, he said that Rogan is not interested in the alternative view. When that seems like pure projection to me, because it's Murray who's not interested in the alternative view. He didn't even know the names of the people he disliked. And when they asked him, have you listened to Daryl Cooper? He's like, no, I couldn't really get into it. So he's not interested in the alternative view. It's not that Rogan isn't. I mean, Rogan's not interested in the mainstream view of history. I mean, we've been taught it in school. So it's not like he's not interested in it. He's just so familiar with it that now he's branching out into these alternative views, and he wants to hear different takes, which is perfectly rational if you've now developed this skepticism about experts and thinking maybe I've been taught all wrong. You know, maybe this version of history is not the
I'm open to the idea about Churchill or something. I think I'm right about Churchill, but I'm open to hearing the other side. I don't think that it's dangerous to let it be out there.
Personally, I think of it as just more of a balanced view of Churchill. It's not, you know, for me, from my own perspective, like looking into this and hearing some of these other people, I feel that, you know, of course we've been propagandized. And so it's interesting. And the best way to deal with it is to have more people on to talk about it. It's not to have less people on to talk about it.
Right. Well,
when Peter Hortez went on his show and talked his side about the thing, everybody talked about it and felt even more that he was full of shit. So it's like people get exposed when they talk for 3 hours about what they think. They get exposed. And if they're wrong, then they get exposed as liars or, you know, whatever, or just really bad thinkers. And so it's not scary or dangerous to hear viewpoints that are incorrect.
No, it's not. You know, but also notice the escalation in Murray's rhetoric. So initially he just started off trying to persuade Rogan to have this balanced list of guests to present countering views. And then he starts with the attacks. So first it's that Dave Smith is a shit thrower and Rogan has on bad guests and he's not interested in the opposite view. And now he's actually saying you're presenting counter historical narratives and you're a dangerous platform because you're giving voices to these fringe views. So he's really escalating this attack and trying to turn Rogan into the enemy here. When he's gone on Rogan's show as an expert to present the countering view. And he's not doing that. He's beginning by launching into these attacks, which is a huge mistake, in my opinion. And I think he paid the price for it.
And just building on your point, William, in this next clip, Murray says figures on the right are playing with dark and ugly stuff.
There are now figures on the right playing with really dark and ugly stuff on their side.
I agree with that.
They are mainstreaming
I don't think Daryl's
and I think it's
doing
partly being mainstreamed by the two people I just described. And both of you have kept speaking to these people. And you don't get on the historians who know about this. And that's just alarming to me.
Well, can I just say, so because I kind of do agree with part of what you said there. Like, I do think it is true that almost as a reaction to like the woke insanity that we've seen on the left. And I think nobody's been a more effective critic of that than you. I do think there has kind of been a right-wing reaction that has embraced racialism and is dangerous and not a good path to go down.
And now they're flirting with Holocaust denial and Hitler and absolving Hitler of blame and much more.
I think you're wrong to include Daryl in that group.
The main thrust of that one is that he's mainstreaming these fringe views. So if you dig into that idea, you have to accept that Rogan is this great and powerful wizard who can manipulate his audience into deciding who is correct and who is wrong. And, also that Rogan is this sort of mainstream platform now, when he's just a podcaster who's pursuing his own interests. He's not trying to become mainstream anything. And in fact, half of what he talks about are aliens and UFC and comedy and things that aren't politically relevant. So it's just not true that Rogan is this great mainstreaming news platform that's going to alter the way we think of history. It's just going to present different ideas to people, which is what you do when dudes have a conversation. People get together and they just chit chat and say the first stupid thing that comes to mind, and then you run off on that tangent. It's not always correct. It's not always true. Sometimes it's garbage. Sometimes you're obviously entertaining some hyperbolic fantasy. And that's why people like the Rogan shows, because you get that sort of personalized, private sort of conversation.
Thinking out loud,
on the internet.
I think it's important for thinking to do that. I think that process is critical to being a first-handed, rational thinker. To be wrong, to shit throw, I guess, sometimes, I think, okay, yeah, that was a little too much, or I went too far, or whatever. As someone who's done comedy, especially, like when I'm trying to do a joke, or when I haven't done it in a while, like you have to like ride that line. If you go over the line, you find out really fast, and then you got to go back. But if you're on the wrong side of the line, it's dumb. It's just like it doesn't go anywhere. And I think it's the same with ideas, that you're wrong unless you're kind of on that line, pushing the reality and looking at reality and checking and double checking and always pushing.
Yeah.
And if you're just always firmly on, I've made up my mind and I'm here, that's not good epistemology.
One of the smears against Rand was that she, was like sympathetic to serial killer. And it's actually the notes that what you're talking about reminds me of that, where she's just like free flowing in her ideas. It wasn't even meant for public consumption, but someone published it in journals, and then lefties had a field day with it. But the other point I want to make is that, Dave is concerned about an illiberal right too. So is everyone. Murray, everyone's watching for it, even Rogan. I mean, fascist is up there with racist in terms of ways to just delegitimize someone's point of view. And Murray thinks he's pointing out something new that no one else is noticing. It's like, oh my God, there could be an illiberal right. Yes, we're all watching for it.
That's so true. And we're more hyper concerned with that than we are with blatant racism and authoritarian daily coming from the left. Like this possibility that maybe people will drift into this racist mindset. You got a whole half of the population over here, maybe 30%, that's there. That is there already daily and getting away with it.
What are we really talking about here? We're not talking about mainstreaming Nazis or racism. We're talking about mainstreaming like a slightly alternative take on history. Like maybe Churchill did something, that pushed the war further, and then you can kind of call him a villain or something. I mean, that's not my take, but if that's your view, that's not racism or anything. That's
right. That doesn't automatically make you a Nazi.
It just makes you like have this sort of alternative view that's not very popular, and you're basically calling Churchill a war hawk. And in some regard, yes, he was for the war, obviously. He wanted to destroy the Nazis. So, I mean, you can take both sides. This is another point I wanted to bring up, is Murray isn't really debating facts. I don't hear him saying, look, Daryl Cooper gets all of his facts wrong. What he's debating is the opinion. So Daryl Cooper has this set of facts, and on top of those facts, he has an opinion based on those facts, and which, you can disagree with. But it's not that he's a shit thrower because he has this different opinion. You have to debate opinions, and you have to, then people can look at the facts and decide which opinion they agree with. But Murray is just, he's not going about this the right way. He's not basing his argument on facts and evidence. He's basing it on having this different opinion, and then calling other people's opinions fringe and dangerous and all these words that don't really mean anything unless you agree with Murray.
Well, speaking of words that hardly mean anything, Murray then tries saying it's weird to mainstream fringe views.
For him to say, I don't really do debates.
Yeah, I think it's weird to mainstream very fringe views constantly and not give another side. I think that's weird.
Well, I mean, I think there's a little bit of a contradiction here. You're saying now that these are fringe views, but then you're also saying that these are enormously powerful views.
No. There's no contradiction. Let me clear it up if you think there is. I think there are very fringe views that have become mainstreamed on the right.
But then aren't they not fringe by definition?
Sure, you can play an epistemological game.
I'm just saying let's be accurate.
But you do understand the concept, don't you?
That fringe ideas become mainstreamed? Yeah. Okay, right. Sure.
So that's it.
Okay.
What is Murray's opposition to playing an epistemological game? Like he doesn't want to get into the philosophy of what's going on here. It's like Smith is the only one interested in real ideas. Murray is rejecting anything at the moral or epistemological level. He just wants to name call. He just wants to say, this is weird, and you shouldn't be acting like a fake expert. I mean, he's got all these terms to call Dave Smith to try to discredit him, but he doesn't want to get into any of the philosophical ideas.
It's weird. It's almost like it is weird for Douglas, actually, because I feel like he's this very smart. I mean, I've seen him in debates and he wipes the floor with people. So I don't really understand what's going on here. He's upset. He came in with this agenda to just kind of like insult them and provide social pressure to I don't know, like bully them somehow.
He's probably one of these types who's very good in some areas where he's comfortable with the facts and can argue based on the facts and evidence. But then when he gets into areas where it's not so clear, like in war, with war, you're dealing with a very tough question, which Ayn Rand tried to deal with, and in some regards took both sides, and that's the killing of innocents. On one hand, she had half disagreement with the death penalty because you might end up killing an innocent person. But then on the other hand, she had a very strong argument for killing innocents in war because she said those deaths are on the hands of the attacker, the aggressor, and the defender has to lash out to defend himself, and innocents are going to get hurt. So she had a very interesting take on this question. And I think this is the question that people like Dave Smith are dealing with, and a lot of libertarians who are anti-war. They see all the innocents dying and it bugs them.
That was Rogan's comment about it being barbaric or seeming barbaric early on.
I think that's Daryl Cooper's issue with Churchill. I think he's kind of mostly anti-war, and he sees the incredible destruction of the war, and that's when people start saying, I mean, it's the anti-war perspective that starts to go, well, maybe we're just better off if we just let ourselves become a dictatorship so that so no one gets hurt. It's kind of a weird
Now, see that
conclusion.
weird?
And
You're using weird.
Well, I mean, it can be an error of thinking,
No,
but the
I'm
point
teasing,
is
but-
that it's not coming from a place of like, oh, I love Nazis and I'm an anti-Semite. Like that is not at all Daryl Cooper. And I don't mean to just be on here defending him because I have not listened to that show. But
weird is just
Murray
one of
is
those...
not making any arguments. Like you said, William, he's just trying to bully and discredit people.
Yeah. Weird is one of those Weasley words that you can kind of, say, oh, I wasn't saying anything bad. I was just saying it was weird. If, and I think, Sonny, before the show, you brought up how that was something that Tim Walz did during the campaign.
I think you brought that up, but yeah, they had that whole, it wasn't Tim Walz, it was the Democrats had a weird campaign against J.D. Vance, which didn't really work because they're weird. It's like the weirdos calling the normal guy weird.
Well, it's the famous tactic of trying to demonize your opponent, and they do it a lot, and they do it in cahoots. When you listen to those compilations of all the Democrats saying the same thing as if they got the same script in the morning, and
they did get the same script, yeah.
And so they started calling J.D. Vance weird and tried to portray him, as this negative, weird dude who isn't normal and you shouldn't like him or pay attention to him because he's weird. And they're doing the same thing. Murray's doing the same thing with Smith and Rogan. And if you listen to the whole interview, he uses weird a lot. He goes on and that's like his favorite word for about 10 minutes. And it's really interesting, to think about, like, why would he do this? Why would he latch onto this word and just want to portray Dave Smith as this weird guy? But then going back to the Inception idea, it seems to kind of work a little bit on Dave Smith. And this is troubling because at the end, Dave Smith he says, I agree that I'm a weird guy. But I don't think he's one of the more
But it's
normal...
ambiguous. Sometimes I'll say it for that reason too. I just think that it's interesting the different terms that, at one point he's calling it throwing shit out there, then dark and ugly stuff. Now he's going to weird. And in this next clip, Murray says he's bemused by Smith's shifting from expert to comedian.
Still slightly bemused about this move from I'm an expert on this and I have views to I'm a comedian.
I've never claimed to be an expert on anything.
This is the problem, Joe. I mean, if somebody
Wait a minute,
says
you have to claim to be an expert on something to have an opinion on something?
You don't have to be. You don't have to be. But
so
this is
the
like,
issue?
I'm not a historian, but I'm pumping out history.
But wait a minute,
I'm not an expert, but I'm talking all the time about this.
But you're not
thing.
even talking about specifically on what he just said.
No, I'm saying this is my point about this. You say I'm not an expert.
So what's the solution? To not talk about it?
No, it's to have more experts around.
Well, the expert class hasn't done a great job.
I know.
Man. This is follow the science.
Yeah, but you know what? I agree with that. I just said to you, I agree with that.
Right. I know.
But
so
one
Douglas,
of the problems
during all of COVID, I will put my track record against any of the expert class on COVID. I'm glad to do that. So should I have just shut up? Should I have shut up by opposing lockdowns and opposing vaccine mandates and talking about the lab leak theory?
At the time. You realize
that's the entire argument that you're making. Let the experts handle this.
No.
You're not an expert. You're right. I was just a comedian.
You're wildly not listening to what I'm saying.
Sounds like Dave Smith's shtick during COVID was anti-COVID.
Yeah, this is Murray just projecting again. Is he saying you're not listening to what I'm saying? When it's Murray who's the one who's not listening. He's not responding to anything Dave says, including the fact that Dave doesn't think he's an expert. So
he doesn't like that. I mean, there's something about that. He's like, he wants Dave to claim to be an expert.
Well, he needs Dave to pretend to be an expert, so then he can say, "Look, you're a shit thrower,
bad expert,
who's just pretending," and that then his argument, his name calling, will have some weight to it. But Dave Smith doesn't fall for it. He's like, "Why are you calling me an expert? I've never said I'm an expert." And then Murray just ignores that, and he repeatedly tries to say that Dave is calling himself an expert or acting like an expert. It's as if he can't hear. It's like his hearing loss has become an issue now because he can't hear what Dave is saying.
Murray,
And, all he has to do is refute the points. He doesn't have, whether
he came
Dave's
to
an
fight.
expert or not, all he has to do is take the data, the facts, and weave his own conclusion out of it for people.
I'm
It's just a shame.
Murray claims he knows the experts have failed, but I don't know if he believes that deep down, if his solution is just more experts,
Well, he's
and
a smart-
without.
Yeah, that's a good question. Does he deep down believe that? I don't think he does. I mean, he's showing that he doesn't think people are rational. People can come to rational conclusions. Like there's this fundamental free speech kind of depends on believing in a general rationality, that people will come to the right conclusion, at least in general. And
Well, free speech comes down to respecting people's minds, because you have to use your own mind to observe reality and think about it and come up with what is true. Well, what it boils down to is you can't rely on experts for everything, especially the most important things in your life. If you don't know if you're a guy and you're looking for a woman and you don't know what a woman is, you got a problem. And if you need to rely on an expert to tell you this is a woman, that's a man, you're not going to live long in this world or survive very long. You're just going to be so confused that you're going to end up walking off a cliff thinking that it's a floor. So
It depends. What the experts are corruptible.
Yeah, they're corruptible. So and also another issue is that there's different levels of expertise. You can be an expert in algebra, but not calculus. And so you're like partly you're a math expert, but not in the higher levels of math. And it's the same deal with biology. You can be an expert in what a man and a woman is. That's not hard. That's easy knowledge. But if you want to know what about mitochondria or some intricate, detailed information about how cellular structures work, well, then you probably need to talk to an expert. And it's the same case in all fields. There's any field that is directly relevant to your life. You need to be an expert in the lowest levels so that you can just function on a daily basis. But then if you need like surgery, you have cancer or something, then you go to an expert in cancer and surgery, because you can't do that yourself. So Murray doesn't seem to get that. He recognizes the need for some experts, but then he just applies it to, well, you need experts on pro-Israel, because you're not competent to be able to make an informed opinion on how Israel should be fighting the war. When, military tactics and everything, that's something you can study from a book. So it's not exactly, you don't need to go to the battlefield to understand if Israel needs to bring down a building in order to take down the terrorists. That's what they need to do.
It's not honest when Murray claims he's not trying to shut anyone down, because he's saying, he already said at the beginning of the show, he's counting how many pro-Israel and how many anti-Israel people he's had on, or Ukraine. And so he wants more experts that agree with him, is the bottom line. But this next clip is...
Before we get into that, I just want to make one comment. This also, I feel like, applies to people need to remember about freedom, that people always point to the flaws of freedom. And then they obsess about that, and they don't consider the alternative. Yes, when a criminal has to go through many trials and be found guilty, and there's a benefit of the doubt and all that, some criminals end up going free. And our principle is that we err on the side of not putting in prison an innocent person, right? That we're gonna attempt to do that. Mm-hmm. And so it's the same with this. Like, free speech is messy in the sense that a lot of people are going to be wrong. It is possible to be influenced, manipulated, propagandized. The only solution, the alternative is control and corruption. And so the best way to do it is to flood the zone with all the ideas and all the conversation about it.
Yeah, that there is merit to that. But this next clip is actually the one where Murray goes off on Smith for not having been to the Middle East.
But to bring in rockets, it was a very bad idea. No, there was not starvation in Gaza after 2005. No, there was no deficit of goods coming in. I've been plenty of times.
There was no deficit?
No, there are plenty.
No goods were kept out.
There are plenty. How many? Have you been to the crossing points?
No.
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been?
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now? I've never been to. Have you ever been to Nazi Germany? Are you allowed to have feelings about them?
You can't time travel, but you can.
Right.
But you can travel.
Okay, but so what? So what's the point? Like,
No,
okay.
I find that
Lots of people have been there and agree with me, and lots of people have been there and agree with you.
Yeah, but
so I
if
don't
you're
know
going
what
to spend a year and a half talking about a place, you should at least do the courtesy of visiting it.
All right. I just think this is a non-argument.
You don't
but
think?
Okay. No, I think it's a non-argument.
But if you're an ex,
Well, you have to go and touch the ground.
No,
to be
I
able
think
talk
you have
about
to
it?
see. I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly if you
Okay.
spend a career talking about something. Yes. I have a journalistic rule of trying never to talk about a country, even in passing, unless I've at least been there.
Once again, he repeats the lie. If you spend a career talking about this, as if Dave Smith's career is Israel-Palestine. It's a weird thing that he keeps trying to like pin on him, you know? And by the way, the next day, he wrote an article in the Telegraph saying the same thing.
I had a lefty friend about 10 years try to do the same thing to me. He's like, you know, you don't understand why we need socialism and globalism. I've been to Europe. You haven't even been there. And, you know, it's just like, it's such a ridiculous, it's just it's the argument from snobbery or the argument from travel.
Well, he's ignoring all the other ways you can get information about a place. You know, you can get it from journalists or from videos, eyewitness testimony. So there's a lot of different ways you can learn about a situation. I'd be surprised if Murray learned something super special, you know, about the border crossings that Smith couldn't pick up from journalists or newspapers.
He is a journalist. So it's his job to then communicate that. And if people can't learn from journalists and people who go places, then his job is pointless.
Yeah, so he could argue on the facts. He could debate. He could be debating Smith on whether there's a deficit in goods crossing the border. I mean, point to some journalist who was there and saw, you know, reported some facts, or look at some statistics, government statistics or something. I don't know how you'd go about it, but Murray is the one making his claim, so he should have some facts or evidence to back it up. And then Smith could counter and try to come up with some facts or evidence for his point, and then you can have an actual debate. But here we are, you know, talking about whether Smith has been to the border or has been to Israel, and which is quite irrelevant to what the facts are on the ground. I mean, are we then? I suppose Murray would then doubt whether Smith was being true if he said, "Oh, I went to the border and saw a deficit of goods." You know, he would say, "No, well, I went to the border and there was no deficit." So then you'd have this battle between eyewitnesses, and you'd get nowhere. So you have to have some facts or evidence to back up your case. And you can't just launch into these ad hominem attacks.
Yeah, I remember a Billy Joel interview from like 30 years ago. People were giving him a hard time because he was writing about the plight of, you know, Atlantic fishermen. And they were like, you know, are you even a fisherman or have family that are fishermen? He's like, I'm a writer. I actually take the experiences of others and put them into a meaningful, usable form. And it's like, you know, there are people that do that, and there are people that read that stuff and take it into account. But the point is that Dave doesn't claim to be a journalist in the first place. And, you know, I haven't been there. Do I not now have a right to agree with Murray, even though I do on Israel?
You have no right. You have no right to speak your mind, Scott.
That's right. So I do want to shift to this Bret Weinstein. He talked about the encounter as well. I think he made some really insightful points.
The mechanism by which you come to understand what is true, Douglas, is discussion. It is discussion in which nobody gets to set the rules about what kinds of opinions can be investigated. And yes, that does cause some garbage stuff to be said, but what reveals that it's garbage stuff? Free and open inquiry that reveals that actually it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. That's how you do it, Konstantin Kisin. I don't know what's wrong with these people. It's really like somebody has figured out how to threaten them into saying things that they full well know aren't true.
They're becoming what they were fighting against.
They're becoming what they were fighting against. And I must say, in both of those cases, I feel like I don't think I was duped to begin with, that they actually held free speech as a high value. So the fact that they are backing away from it and calling for some kind of standard, self-imposed or otherwise, to prevent certain, the fact is, heterodoxy is heterodoxy. And it often sounds crazy, and most of it is. But the good stuff is the stuff that sounds crazy that then does strangely stand up to scrutiny. That's how you figure out what's coming, is you look at the heterodox stuff and you figure out what has predictive power.
That's objectivity. He's so right. And that's kind of what I was trying to say before, is like, it's playing around with that crap. That's how you grow and learn new things and make new integrations. And you have to hear a lot of crap in order to do that. It's I don't know what is wrong with these people either. I'm a big admirer of Douglas Murray, and I'm kind of shocked.
Well, two things. Let me make 2 points. One is sometimes Bret seems perplexed, like he doesn't understand, how Murray could be so against free speech now when he thought he was a free speech warrior before. And it might not be the case that Murray is completely against free speech. It's just that there's this one aspect that's troubling him now and has come about because there's this big moral political question about these wars. And so sometimes your underlying premises or presumptions don't come out until you have to figure out these questions, these tough questions, like killing innocents in war, whether Israel's on the side of the right or wrong. So that's one aspect. But then he also talks about discussion and, the truth coming out by having these discussions. And on one hand, that's true. If you don't know the truth through observation or your own logical reasoning, then you need to talk to various people and get different ideas, because your mind isn't going to come up with the same ideas that somebody else comes up with. And so you need to go to other people to figure out, well, what are some alternative ideas that I'm not considering that might lead me down the right path to the truth? And so I do agree with Bret that discussion is important, but it's not everything. Like some people, like Rogan, might be pursuing his own values through his own observation of which experts to talk to. And so he's going down the road of his values, and he's not going to get stopped until he reaches a roadblock and says, oh, this isn't leading to truth. I need to go back and talk to different experts.
I just think there's value in what he was saying about the heterodoxy, that the fight and the debate and not everyone just accepting one, the opposite of that is kind of a dogma or just these unfixed rationalistic principles that never change no matter how much the facts on the ground, change in reality. So I like Bret's approach. I kind of use that clip partially because he expressed some ideas I've been thinking about.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing about discussion, is that it doesn't work if you don't listen. So if Murray doesn't listen to the facts being presented on the other side, he's like you say, just being a rationalist, working on his own ideas and elaborating on his own fantasy world. And he's not actually engaging in discussion. He's not listening to people.
To your point, William, maybe the problem here is that they are not talking about the real issue. Like the real issue, the philosophy of war, or, what is moral and immoral in war. And because they're not talking about that, like explicitly in kind of an abstract way, we're kind of missing, then they're just sort of both kind of, it's difficult to have the discussion because at the end of the day, they kind of agree on the facts. They're just coming to different conclusions based on their own maybe default ideas about war. And they're not really talking about that part of it.
I think they do disagree on some of the facts. Like Dave Smith is the sort of anti-war libertarian who would call Gaza a concentration camp or something like a concentration camp. I know he agrees it's not an actual concentration camp, but he says there's aspects of that. And then Murray would come back and say it's not a concentration camp. And so they disagree on some of them.
But that's a conclusion. I mean, they'd agree that these are people, they're in a certain area, they can't really come and go freely. I mean, they would agree on certain facts about it.
Can I throw a different theory out there that both Konstantin Kizin and Murray are part of that kind of upper crust British intellectual. Kizin spoke at the Oxford Union recently, and so that's when you start to get into a little bit more of credentialism, and because I agree with them on Israel, but it's not that. That's why I think there's such a snootiness about it. You also see it was the old snooty Republicans that were the most likely to have TDS or be never Trumpers, the George Will, the Jonah Goldbergs, the kind of ones that thought they're above it all.
I don't know what you call it, but like if you poison the conversation, then you can't even get at the factual discussion. Like Murray began with this series of attacks, calling them names and disparaging their motives. And so it's poisoning the conversation. It's like he didn't want to have a serious conversation about the facts and the evidence of what's going on in Gaza.
And by discrediting himself, he discredited any conversation he might have about it, where he's bringing credible information. And now everyone's like, well, how can we trust you? Because you're obviously, not coming here honestly.
Yeah, you just spent 45 minutes messing up, whether Dave Smith thinks he's an expert. You couldn't even get that straight. And you didn't know Daryl Cooper's name. And I mean, it's all these things that he just messed up on.
And he's repeatedly told, no, that's not right. No, that's not right. And then he just continues to say it.
Once he found out Smith was going to be on the show, he decided to, go after both of them on the show and try to use it to make himself into like the anti-Rogan, because he knew he was never going to be on Rogan again. What's interesting is that Jordan Peterson was on talking to Rogan about it later, and he takes a little bit different. He almost is agreeing with Murray, but doing so in a more respectful way to Rogan. And in this clip, he starts asking about. Go ahead.
Sorry. Respectful or manipulative?
We'll let the audience decide.
How do you know, given your radical increase in stature over the last 10 years, how do you know when your curiosity and even your skepticism about the fact that things aren't the way that people say they are, because that's certainly been demonstrated in the last 10 years, how should anyone decide what guardrails to put up? Like, what do you look for? Do you have a conceptual system worked out for that? Like, because
what do you mean? In what way?
Well,
how do I look for in terms of people to talk to?
Yeah. Because you have this insanely immense platform, and you're inviting people onto it. And you said to Douglas, and I know this to be true, that you're not really thinking about the outcome exactly. You're thinking about, this is an interesting person to talk to, and I'd like to go on that quest. But then you have the additional conundrum. We're trying to work this out in the Daily Wire side of things too.
Again, Peterson, like Murray in the beginning, was asking Rogan, how do you know who to have guests, which guests to have on? Peterson's making this question seem like it's crazy or like hard to figure out. Like, why do you need an expert to figure out what your values are, and like which guests to have on. I mean, like setting up guardrails, that's just a normal thing you do in making a choice of who to talk to. You see someone, he
Yeah.
comes up with an idea, you think, oh, that's an interesting idea, that kind of relates to what I'm thinking about, let me talk to that guy. Is this a mystery? Is it like a magic formula you need to figure out what guardrails to put up?
Well,
No, if someone sounds insane or crazy, well, okay, maybe you don't want to talk to that guy unless you're a psychologist and you're interested in the insane. It depends on your values.
The implication is that Peterson isn't happy with Rogan's current guardrails.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like Murray. He's just trying to do it in a more polite way. Murray was saying, you're a shit thrower, you're a dangerous platformer. And here Peterson's taking a step back and being more inquisitive. Hey, Joe, like, what do you think about when you consider which guests to have on? And how do you keep the psychopaths at bay? It's like, okay, well, how does a normal person do that? It's just a normal thing people do in this world. You have your own reason, your own common sense, and you use it, to keep people away that you don't want to talk to, and to invite people that you do want to talk to.
The implication is that people are stupid and they need experts to tell them what experts to talk to, or it's a really nasty view of people.
Yeah, I think Peterson was trying to split the difference between the two. Go ahead, William. Sorry.
Yeah. So it just reminded me of I think it was Rush Limbaugh who said, like, educators were dumbing down America, or and this is a theme in objectivism as well, is that the left has destroyed education and turned students into idiots. And this seems like a perfect example of it, where Peterson can't figure out who to talk to. It's just like, this is the most basic question. We're verbal creatures. We talk to people every day. You do. This is like communication 101. If you don't know how to decide who to talk to, you got a real problem.
And honestly, it's everyone who's not the number one podcaster in America who should be rethinking how they choose their guests.
Yeah, I was saying this morning. I was saying this morning to somebody, maybe it was you, Scott. I was like, look how well it worked. He made a really good choice, because he just had one of the most viral shows of his entire career by having Dave Smith and Douglas Murray on at the same time. He made it really popular.
He has his finger on the pulse, but it's interesting that it's just him following his values. That's another issue here, is like, if you're a rational or just a normal person, and you're good at communicating, you're good at interviewing, you're good at having discussions and conversations, then people are going to want to watch that, because people in general like to hear other people talking about things. And, they go to debates, they go to lectures, they want to, hear people talk about these important questions, and even weird ideas like aliens and stuff. Because, a lot of people didn't understand the videos that came out and wanted different perspectives on whether these were alien aircraft. So, it just seems really questionable to me that Peterson is asking such a basic question as if it's a conundrum. And I think, on one hand, I think he's trying to sympathize with Rogan, saying that this is the same question we're dealing with over at my academy. And he's appealing to Rogan's stature as the number one podcaster. So it seems like, in a backhanded sort of way, or like an indirect sort of way, he's trying to say, which I think he makes explicit later, with great power comes great responsibility. And so he's trying to appeal to Rogan's sense of responsibility to his audience. And to some degree, you can sympathize with that. You don't want to have on people who are going to cause real problems in the culture. But on one hand, you need to reject that and say, I'm not completely responsible for the people listening to me. It's the same thing that, we dealt with, back in the 80s or 90s, when they were claiming that heavy metal music was had a corrupting influence on the youth. And I think it's a way of deflecting attention away from someone's argument or, the guests he has on his show by saying, oh, they're just corrupting the youth. When the real issue is you have a problem with that guest and you don't like what he's saying. So I don't know. That's basically my point.
Yeah. Well, Sonny, you brought up experts for experts, and we have a clip of Yaron Brook, chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute, saying that even radical ideas like objectivism need their own experts to be legitimized before he defends gatekeepers much more broadly.
So even if we have a radical new perspective, a radical new point of view, in order to get that point of view legitimized, if you will, we're going to need our own experts. Now, the second thing one needs, and this goes to the whole position Rogan is in, is because most of us don't have the time to go figure out who's an expert and who's not, who's biased and who's not, what is a perspective, read 5 books on a topic to figure out which one was true and which one was not, or maybe all 5 are wrong, or don't make any sense and glean the right information. I mean, that's a lot of work. We need experts on experts. We need gatekeepers. We need gatekeepers. We need people who do the work on figuring out who are the reliable experts and who are not. A culture cannot survive without gatekeepers.
I think Howard Rourke said that in The Fountainhead. I need gatekeepers. I need more gatekeepers.
Hey, Scott, you should declare yourself the expert on the expert who is Yaron Brook.
Yeah, exactly. I'm Yaron Brook expert, so now I can kind of start a movement based on that. I don't know. He says later that like the main role of intellectuals is being gatekeeping, and I don't agree with that. You're supposed to put out...
No, but you know what? He believes that, and that is how he has acted for 10 years. He believes that he should be gatekeeping, and that's why nobody listens to him, and that's why he runs a cult and he's not actually forwarding the ideas of Ayn Rand. Guess who's an expert at Ayn Rand? Ayn Rand, and she wrote a million things. You don't need experts. You need to get that out there. Oh my God, he drives me crazy.
There's a part called speech. It's like, whose reason? Yours. And so you don't necessarily need an expert. He's like, oh, it takes so much work. But I mean, if you really care about something, you often do go in and do the work.
What takes work? What specifically? I mean, read Atlas Shrugged, and even the person who's done nothing else can be influenced by that and by this idea of, a little bit of self-interest and a little bit like you don't have to become a scholar to be positively influenced by objectivism.
But there's an implication that you need to be a scholar to be an expert.
So if you're a Yaron Brook type and you're interested in cultivating an audience of, people who just give you money and listen and repeat everything you say as if it were the gospel truth, well, then you're going to want expert upon expert upon expert and gatekeeper for gatekeepers, because that's how you exert control over your audience.
That's right.
They're not going to think for themselves anymore. They're just going to go to you as an expert and go to anyone that you say is an expert. And you're just going to develop this cult of personality who is just interested in giving you their paycheck. So to hear about some stupid art thing that you're talking about, or give a movie review, or like do stuff that you're not an expert on. I mean, Yaron Brook is the biggest fake expert on every topic in the world. He's not even a real expert on objectivism.
He's not. He hasn't even read Opar or anything like that. He's made so many errors, basic errors of the more technical philosophy. So, I believe that he's read Atlas Shrugged or whatever, but he's not an expert. And I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I'm saying I know more than him.
People go to him because he has the credential of chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute.
Do you know what's funny? When he took over that position, he was saying, I'm not a philosopher. I'm a businessman. I'm just here to run the business side of things. and the philosophers at the Institute will do the philosophy and so on. I mean, that was his sort of, he did that shtick for 10 years. But now he's an expert.
Well, in this final clip of Yaron, he identifies Rogan as a public intellectual, then tries to hold him to that standard.
We need somebody to screen. That is the role of public intellectuals. Public intellectuals are not, for the most part, specialists, experts in a narrow field. One of the things that public intellectuals do, one of the things that I do, I think, for you, one of the things that Joe Rogan should do, but he doesn't, is screen the experts. Figure out who the experts are. Who are the experts worth listening to and who are the experts not worth listening to? I give a platform for those worth listening to. Not give a platform to those not worth listening to. And this is where, this is what Joe Rogan does. But sadly, Joe Rogan gives a platform to many people who don't deserve it, that he shouldn't. And by doing so, he is defaulting on his responsibility as a public figure, functioning as a public intellectual.
Is he reading an excerpt from Anthem? Like, this is the Council of Scholars, it kind of sounds like to me. What the hell?
He's trying to ascribe not only Joe Rogan's identity, saying that he's a public intellectual, but he's also trying to describe or impose Rogan's work, his duty to society.
Yes.
Like he has this duty to screen the experts, as if Rogan has infinite time on his hands to do everything Yaron Brook wants him to do. No, we all have finite time. We all have to make the best of our time. And Rogan obviously should not be trying to screen every expert and figure out who he should talk to based on other people's opinions of who the experts are. He's deciding who to talk to based on his own values and his own interests, what he thinks will be a good conversation for him. And that just happens to be interesting to millions of other people.
When I hear Yaron say, oh no, there could be somebody wrong on the internet, it's like, I mean, I'm like, so what? So what if Rogan has people on that are wrong? I mean, he has people on that are wrong every day. I don't understand. This is only come up now because they don't like what some of the things that are happening in the culture right now, which is sort of this reanalysis of history and things like that. They don't like that.
He's got this great gatekeeping process of just uncritically reporting whatever the TDS publications like the Dispatch and Bulwark are reporting that day. I mean, it's just the idea, he's saying I do this and Rogan should be doing this. He should be more like me. Then, maybe our audiences would be closer.
I feel like that's what's wrong with Yaron. and also he doesn't screen people. He just talks himself.
Well, I'd like to know when Yaron became such a big altruist. Here he is trying to say Rogan shouldn't pursue his own values, but he should pursue the interests of the audience and do these services for the
greater
public.
good. The greater good.
When did this the word public intellectual come up? What is that?
Yeah.
I thought objectivists were against public property, public interest. Why are they talking about a public intellectual? What the hell is a public intellectual? No, we have new intellectuals and we have old intellectuals. The new intellectuals are supposed to be promoting self-interest and capitalism. And the old intellectuals are these altruists and selfless people. So I don't know what he's talking about here. Why is he venturing into this altruistic world of the public intellectual?
It serves his purpose, and maybe he's been palling up around the cultural left for too long. There is a quote from Atlas Shrugged that I think reflects kind of the true deep down spirit of Yaron and even Murray. this is one of their public intellectuals at one of the parties, and it would work very simply, said Balf Eubank. There should be a law limiting the sale of any book to 10,000 copies. This would throw the literary market open to new talent, fresh ideas, and non-commercial writing. If people were forbidden to buy 1 million copies of the same piece of trash, they would be forced to buy better books. It's clout chasing. They want part of Rogan's audience, and they feel like they're held back because they're too responsible, or whatever kind of, worldview they create in their mind to rationalize it. But they ultimately they want a piece of Rogan. They want a piece of what he has. It's envy.
Well, it's kind of like what do you call it in economics when there's only a certain amount of something, and so you have to divide it up fairly,
like a zero sum.
I don't remember, but what you said about limiting book sales in order to create space for other books, that's the idea that there's limited resources, limited things you can have. Why can't you just have a bunch
they call
of
that
different
zero
books?
sum.
Okay, zero sum game. So why can't you? But that's something objectivists reject in economics. So why is he talking about, we have to have a balancing of experts, we need to gatekeep these experts, as if there's not going to be room for these experts elsewhere on other podcasts, or you can't persuade
said on a show
Rogan.
Recently that that his low audience numbers was actually a reflection on the culture, and so that's what's going on. It's wrong. Rogan shouldn't have so many audience with him having these bad guests. I need to go on there and set him straight. That's what's driving a lot of this.
Well, it's kind of a narcissistic power lust, or power game. So they're trying to find these rationalistic ways to persuade Rogan to have on their experts or have their side on. They want their voice to be heard. So ultimately, I suppose Yaron Brook will say, Rogan needs to have me on because I need to give the countering viewpoint to such and such topic. And then Rogan, if they manage to persuade Rogan to have this altruistic standard, Rogan will be like, oh yeah, I should have on Yaron Brook because he has the countering viewpoint. So that
if he has Yaron on, he should have us on as counter.
Yeah. Well, yeah, then we'd fall in the same boat, and
they're not experts.
I'd settle for Dave Smith taking him apart. He's already said he won't debate Dave Smith. I think he knows he's getting his clock cleaned.
I don't know how aware they are of what they're doing at the cultural level, and attacking Rogan, his own speech, and trying to compel him to have on voices that he doesn't really want to have on or isn't ready to pursue. That is like a trend towards having another fairness doctrine for the internet or something like that. Ayn Rand wrote an article, which I disagree with, that you should apply the fairness doctrine to education because, it was applied to radio and TV to balance out the voices. And she said, well, in education is corrupted in one direction, towards leftist claptrap. So we need a fairness doctrine to have on opposing views so that education doesn't get completely destroyed. I think the solution is not to compel speech by those giving the wrong opinion. It's to open up avenues, like give other radio frequencies to the opposing view. So you don't have to compel someone's speech. You just have to offer a channel or a platform to the opposition. And that's something that we can be doing. We can be saying that, look, there's plenty of space for other podcasts to bring on these experts.
That exists now.
Yeah, it already exists. Yeah. And Murray went off Joe Rogan and the next day had an article published in The Telegraph and then was on Bill Maher and then Bari Weiss and then who else's podcast right afterwards? Somebody else.
But it's a way of saying, he shouldn't have that audience. He should have to share with us. and he may have a better audience, but I'm morally superior to him.
It's a power struggle, and I think it's a bad sign that we have people like Yaron Brook in the objectivist world going along with this standard of compelling speech. It's not a good look. It's not a good trend. It's not freedom of speech. And I think that if they have any sense, they've got to come around to the realization that they're wrong on this. Otherwise, they're just going way down the rabbit hole of altruism, and they probably won't be able to get back up.
You know, they were also on the side of the big tech censors.
Yeah, it's a private company, even when the government
Not only
was
that, I
leaning
mean,
on them.
yeah. And I mean, to the point of it being cultural and then very quickly going straight into government censorship. I believe that we had that happen with the social media companies, where in 2015, they were getting a lot of social pressure because of Trump, and they eventually really silenced a lot of conservative voices. And in fact, Facebook kind of crushed 80% of conservative blogs out there. I don't know if you guys remember this, but it used to be that everybody would go to Facebook and all the conservative blogs were getting all this attention there, and he ended up just crushing their businesses. And it took years to find other avenues, to build other avenues up for those ideas to get out. And at the time, it's like, oh, it's a private company, but I was arguing for the moral value of an open platform and free speech, and as a cultural value. And then within a year or two, the FBI and the CIA, which we now know, the FBI and the CIA had got all involved and started and censored even the president of the United States ultimately.
Yeah.
And the New York Post. So it went from the cultural, silencing of one side as being just not okay, to the government stepping in and silencing a president of the United States within 5 years.
Before the election last year, Yaron said that free speech was about as good as it's ever been in this country because, like Lenny Bruce could curse in public. But I think that's kind of a superficial way to judge. And actually, he thinks it's now gotten a lot worse, that Trump has chilled free speech. Forget what the government was doing and stopping people from criticizing COVID or vaccines or whatever. But, now it's under pressure. Now we're dangerous. And
this fear of speech is the problem. The cultural fear of hearing something that isn't true or hearing something that's racist or, whatever is the problem. Like, get over it. It's just like
it's your view of humanity,
just words.
Of how much you trust people to be able to handle things, and how much, they just have to be governed by a priest expert class.
Yeah.
So I think we talked about a lot of really great stuff. Any final thoughts from either of you?
Yeah, I'd like to make a point. First of all, one quick point is one of the arguments I've been making is that there's this attempt to impose a different standard for choosing who to talk to and your speech and all that. And one of them is to appeal to the public interest, or like Rogan's audience, or the responsibility you have to the public. And Ayn Rand wrote about this in her article, Have Gun, Will Nudge, which is in the Objectivist newsletter, March 1962. So I won't quote from the article, but she does talk about like what is the public interest and can you even know what it is and what is its effect on the freedom of speech issues. So I recommend people read that. But another point I wanted to bring out is that one of the ways that these people are trying to undermine free speech is by attacking the results of people's free speech. So they're saying that Rogan has on these guests and then he's corrupting his audience. So that's kind of like the result of your free speech. So I think that's a big problem, and it's a historical issue that goes back to Socrates. Socrates was saying certain things and corrupting the youth, and so then they put him on trial and put him to death for it. But it also goes to like the Salem witch trials, to the issue of like whether AC/DC was corrupting the youth with their satanic music. So it's always this idea that your free speech is a corrupting influence on a segment of the public or society, and we can't have that. So that's a way they undermine free speech. And now it's a real problem because it's even bled into objectivism, where Yaron Brook is now agreeing with Murray, and we need to curtail Rogan's guest list or balance it out and have different experts on. So he's even trying to compel the speech and affect it in that way.
Just saying.
That's exactly right. That the fear of speech, of people being wrong or doing things that some people, that is the precursor to government censorship.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I think we talked about a lot of really great stuff. And again, I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig and Sonny Lohman, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.